Welcome to the Emotional Balance Sheet, the go-to podcast for parents with multiple kids, especially those with twins, triplets, or more, who are navigating the maze of modern family life and personal finance. Whether you're overwhelmed by education or retirement planning, parenting dilemmas, career transitions, or trying to define your purpose and plan, we're here to guide you with empathy, encouragement, and expertise. Hosted by Paul Fenner, founder of Tama Capital, a certified financial planner and parent to 4 kids, including a set of triplets. Our podcast is your ally in the quest for financial peace of mind, proving that money matters, but family comes first. Subscribe now and join our community of empowered parents at tamacapital.com. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon for investment decisions. Clients of Tama may retain positions in the securities discussed in this podcast.
What does comprehensive financial planning even mean? At Tama Capital, it means a family office where lifestyle planning such as retirement, college, portfolio management, and tax prep and planning are all under one umbrella. But it goes beyond numbers. We focus as much on the emotional side of financial planning as we do on the financial side. We get you. We understand your challenges of building a family, business or career, and a healthy life. We are devoted to wealth planning for families like yours because we are you. Learn how our family can help your family by visiting tamacapital.com. Parents, have you ever wondered what it's like going through the college planning process from your kids' perspective? Have you ever wondered what they see? I know it could be a very interesting perspective. It's a very emotional decision, this whole college planning journey. But today, I welcome a very special guest, 19-year-old Megan Brissette, who just finished her freshman year at Michigan State University. Megan's going to provide us a front row seat to the challenges, surprises, and triumphs that come with this major life milestone. Megan also goes through the very interesting transitions from a social, academic, and financial standpoint. She shares some very in-depth conversations that her parents had with her and vice versa throughout the entire planning process that covered over 4 years. I'm really excited to have you hear from a student's perspective what this journey has been like. Please enjoy my conversation with Megan Brissette. All right, Megan Brissette, I'm so excited to have this conversation with you. You are going to be officially the youngest person ever on the podcast, believe it or not.
Oh, wow.
At the ripe old age of 18?
19.
19.
19.
That year went fast for me, so as I'm sure it did you.
Oh, yeah. But yes.
So I've been looking to have this conversation with you because I want to give the parents out there a front row seat or perspective for what it was like going through the college planning process with you, both from like picking your schools, developing a list, the financial aspects of it, and then really like what the transition was for you, both socially and academically, this first year for you at Michigan State. I think the best place for us to start is, how did you initially develop your college list? And if you wouldn't mind like telling us a little bit about how the schools that you ended up choosing came on that list.
Yeah, of course. So at my high school, they kind of started our college planning process. Honestly, the first month of freshman year kind of got a little thrown off because of COVID, but they came in there, honestly, the first month and told us to start just looking at schools, thinking it through and talking with our parents, because obviously our parents are a huge part of it with the finances. No 18-year-old kid is going to be able to put themselves through college by themselves. And so I kind of just started looking at in-state schools. I mean, here in Michigan, we have such good public universities. And so I obviously looked at those, your Michigan State, U of M, Central, Western, all of those schools. Um, and by the time I got to my junior year, I really was starting to take the ACT and SAT test scores and seeing what was like truly within reach for me, first of all, of where I would even get in, because you can't try and go there if you're not going to get in. And I just started looking at what schools have the best program for me. I'm a pre-med student wanting to go to med school after. And so the biggest thing for me was that they have a good STEM program that's going to set me up for success and ultimately get me to my end goal of medical school. And so although there were some schools that I really would like to go to because of location or school culture, it just wasn't feasible because they didn't have what I needed academically. Um, and so I just kind of started using things like that to narrow down my list. And then once I got to that point, I started talking with guidance counselors at school and my parents to look at these schools then and say, okay, what can we afford? Because
How
my
many schools did
parents,
you start with? Like, how many schools were initially on your list?
about 17, where it was
Okay.
just the broad list schools I was interested in. I ended up applying to 10.
I remember
That
the number
ended,
10.
yes, that was a number that they always told us at school was a good reach. And within that, I had 4 out of state schools and then 6 in state schools and 2 private universities, and the rest were all public universities. Um, and I just started to chip away at the list with my parents, looking at tuition prices and just kind of starting to have that general conversation of what's feasible for our family and going from there, basically.
So interestingly enough, your parents, well, really your mom, introduced me to your guidance counselor, Holly
Yes.
Bennett, who's been on the show a couple of times now.
Oh, really?
And she's been extraordinary. She has so much insight into what it's like, not only from her vantage point of being a high school guidance counselor, but going through the process herself with her. I think she has a set of twins, I think.
Yes. She also had a daughter that I graduated with
Yes.
who went to college at the same time as me. Yeah, no, Mrs.
So
Bennett was great.
so what was some initial, I guess, learnings that you took away from her when she came in and started talking to y'all when you were in high school? I know you mentioned she came in your freshman year. Um, what were some of the things that she was emphasizing at that point?
Her biggest thing was always open communication with parents, like making sure you're having conversations with your parents. You have no idea how many girls I went to high school with that were just fully blindsided by the financial aspect with their parents, which I'm sure she's talked at lengths about. But she just wanted us to make sure that we're looking at schools that are reasonable to go to, both financially and academically, and location, thinking if you want to go in state, out of state, like it's a big change to move out of state. And just once again, making sure it has the programs that you need so you can use your degree.
I think you hit the nail on the head with one of that. And I've had this experience twice with a few families I've worked with where there wasn't a whole lot of communication. This is back when I just started becoming an advisor 15 years ago, where the conversations weren't happening with the kids, and you have a you have a kid that gets into their quote unquote dream school only to find out that it's completely non-affordable. Like they just can't make the numbers work, or you're going in debt way more than you should be. So that's always a concern for me. And like you mentioned, I've really encouraged parents to start having these conversations with their kids at age, freshman year, sophomore year, and really like being transparent and laying out for them like, this is how much we've saved for you. So when you start making your list and then we start looking at how much it costs to go to these schools, we're basically figuring out the return on investment, if you will, like how much is it going to cost, what scholarships you may be getting, financial aid, what loans you may be eligible for, and just going down that checklist, if you will, to make sure that the schools that you're looking for are indeed a good fit, not only academically but socially and financially as well. And that's those 3 points are a lot of what Miss Bennett and I had talked about during our multiple conversations that people, you can't just isolate one of those three. They all kind of work together.
Yeah, 100%. She started having meetings for her parents our sophomore year, and that was the biggest thing that she tried to drill into them was those big three things.
So without this is where it gets tricky having this conversation with you, because we know each other so well, and it's been such I'm so proud of you and what you've accomplished in going through this, and going through your first year at Michigan State, and knowing your parents as well as I do. What were those? If you can give us like any insight, Megan, like what were those conversations like with mom and dad?
So I'm not gonna lie, freshman and sophomore year, there were a lot of heated conversations with little old 16-year-old me. And my situation ended up being differently than my parents portrayed it. They kind of gave me the absolute worst case scenario. Like absolute
Yep.
worst case scenario. And I wasn't a huge fan of it. I'm and my little entitled 16-year-old brain. And so there was a lot of pushback. And I was like, what the what? All of these people I go to school with, this is not how it is for them. Whatever. But in the long run, I mean, it ended up, as you know, far different than how the picture was painted to me, God, like 4 years ago. But without having those hard conversations early on, I would have had unreasonable expectations. And say my parents didn't have those conversations with me. I love the school I ended up at, but as you know, I really wanted to go to University of Kentucky. I loved the school, loved the location, the program, all of it. But it was really expensive, and that wasn't an amount of debt I was willing to take on. And so after having those long, hard conversations, it just ultimately ended up being easier to make decisions with my parents and have open conversations, if that makes sense. Just because we'd already gotten the hard part out of the way, and everything from there was just going up.
Yeah, I was actually really surprised when you ended up choosing Michigan State over Kentucky. And we're not going to discuss like financial numbers, during our conversation. We're going to keep those private. But I think what's interesting about the process that you went through is that obviously Kentucky was one of the most expensive schools, even though you got a really great scholarship. It kind of brought it down to closer to what like in-state was for Michigan State. But then you also had options that were less expensive route. I didn't want to say cheaper because it's not a cheaper school. It was just less expensive. But again, you came back to a very thoughtful process on your part, figuring out, what do I want to do and how does that the academics align to that? And I think at the end of the day, you ended up picking the best situation for you.
Yeah, I would 100% agree. I couldn't be happier with where I ended up in the program that I'm in. It's just there's so many moving pieces that you have to take into consideration before making that final decision.
So let's talk high level for a little bit about the financial perspective or financial planning perspective of this. Years ago, I kind of developed this case study with one of my families, and she was actually a single mom, and she was sending her son abroad. And how we figured it out was this, we call it the 1/4 strategy, where she saved 1/4, so 25% of the cost to go there. While he was going there, she paid another 25%. I think they've got like 25% covered in grants and scholarships. And then her son basically covered the remaining 25%. So he ended up graduating from this prestigious European university with zero debt. And so it's been really interesting working with you and your family on almost that exact same strategy. And to be able to get through this first year with you and see that you've actually been able to pull it off. Can you walk us through like what that was? Because I think you just kind of alluded to is like that initial worst case scenario that your parents laid out to you, 3 or 4 years ago didn't end up happening that way, which ended up being a great thing.
Yeah, I never would have expected that. But we all kind of, as you know, did our part. And so, yeah, there's so many moving parts with how we're tackling school, I guess I'll say. Because my parents have their portion, I have my portion. Mine is a little bit more like cookie cutter cut out. Like I know what's expected of me and there's less. Like I don't know if I'm supposed to like number drop like I'm trying to think of
You don't have to drop numbers. It's okay.
say it without explaining it. I have a set amount because I've been working since I was a sophomore in high school and I've always been really good about saving money. I have a certain amount of money that's saved up and I have that allocated for all of my 4 years of college. I use half of that and then I am expected to make the other half of that in the summer. And so those two pieces combined are my contribution to paying for my school. And then I also am responsible for paying my sorority dues, which I am usually able to cover in the summer and put that towards it, if that makes sense.
It does. How does that make you feel knowing that you have a specific dollar amount that is your responsibility to cover? Like, I don't think we've had so many conversations. I don't think I've ever asked you that question. Like, how did that sit with you? Because I'm sure that you have seen, or you have friends that were in much easier situations, probably much harder situations. And so I'm trying to wrap my arms around the social financial impact, if that makes sense, of that.
I mean, I've never been one that likes to fully rely on my parents. Like I started working. I mean, I babysat your kids when I was like 12 years old.
You babysit triplets plus ones before.
I mean, I've been doing this like making money since I was like 12 years old, basically, and I've just always liked saving it. For me personally, I don't have a problem with paying for part of my school. Part of me is proud that I'm able to contribute so much to my education because I do work hard. I'm always at work. You all know this.
You do.
I
work 2 jobs during the summer.
I do. I work about 50 hours a week once everything's said and done. And so I am really proud to be able to help my parents out. I know I'm in a bit of a different situation. My parents have given me so much my entire life. I mean, they've been paying for school since I was 5 years old. And so a part of me is just very proud to be able to do that and that I have the drive and the resources and opportunities to be able to contribute because they've done so much for me for so long. But that's not always the case, I guess. I know some people who pay for school and are very ticked off about it. So it's kind of just a personality thing, but no. I mean, I paid for my first semester of school last year, and I'm proud of that. And so I have no problem with it. I know a lot of other people would, but.
Well, I mean, the great thing going back to this whole strategy that we've developed, for you and with you, I think the impressive thing about it is that everybody, to your point that you just made, it's like your family, it's a team, and you all have and know like what your contribution is to this objective. I mean, when I sit down with parents, and they talk about I talk to them about what their purpose is, what their objectives are, and a lot of times it comes up about helping my kids through school. Why is that important? And I think, in working with your parents for as long as I have, you've always been extremely driven and know that you want to, like, 4 years is just your first 4 years. Beyond that, you're going to go to med school, and that's going to be an additional cost. And so I think, their purpose has always been to try to get you through your undergrad with no debt, because they know that med school, as we all know, is going to be a huge, financial price to pay. And I think that's what's so impressive about, starting early, like we did with you, your parents starting early with the conversations and setting realistic expectations, especially with you, again, being as driven as you are and knowing that you want to continue your education much further down the road, I think is I think is one of the most impressive pieces of working with you and your parents is that you guys have been really locked in on this. And as a team, everybody has contributed. And, here we are, first year, and we're right on track.
Yeah, I mean, my dad and I were talking about this earlier when he was on his lunch break from work. We were sitting downstairs just running numbers and everything. So there's so many different places we have to pay with how my living situation is this year. And so it's just so interesting to see how it all worked out.
So let's pivot away from the financial stuff for a little bit and talk about transitions. There's a book behind me on my bookshelf called Design, or actually Life is in the Transitions by Bruce Feiler. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. But you're going through like one of your biggest life transitions, this move from, high school to college. Walk us through what that transition's been like for you, the good and the bad, and maybe what surprised you the most.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it was academically, the transition was great. It was very comparable to the work that I did in high school. And so academically, the transition was almost seamless for me. I mean, first semester could not have gone better. I feel like the hardest transition, I would say, was the social one. I'm not gonna lie. I had a really solid group of friends in high school, and people grow and change, especially those first couple weeks of college. I mean, that is such a crucial period where you need to just be all in and just trying all new things, and that's going to change people. And so I had my own bumps in the road, we'll call them, with previous friends, and just that was hard because I invested so much time in those relationships at first, and kind of I didn't do what I'm telling other people to do, or I didn't throw myself out there in 10 billion different directions. I stuck with what was comfortable because school felt comfortable. Everything felt comfortable. So I was like, oh, it's all going to be fine. I don't need to do anything. And things change over time. And so I would just, anyone, just, I would urge them to throw yourself out there, try anything that remotely interests you. Because I did not do that. And I was lucky that sorority recruitment was later in the semester than it usually is. And so that was my saving grace. And everything just happens for a reason. And so I couldn't be happier with how it ended up. But the transition's definitely interesting. Interesting sharing a room with someone you don't know and living in a whole new place, not having a car, and just navigating all of that without your parents on your back. I know so many people who struggled with holding themselves accountable, with going to class, and just not having that parental guidance. And so you just have to know yourself and hold yourself accountable a lot.
I want to go back to, you said that from an academic standpoint, you felt it was probably the easiest part of the transition. It was fairly seamless, I think is the word that you used. Can you pinpoint one or two items to why you think it was that easy of a transition? I think I have a few ideas in my head, but I want to see if those are right.
We're probably thinking of the same things. I mean, we all know my high school was very academically rigorous. I put myself in harder classes to challenge myself. I've always been a student where if I'm not challenged, I wouldn't say the word fail, but I'm not going to perform as well as I should be. And so it was just honestly, college was easier than high school. I think the biggest reason why it wasn't the content, it was the way that we're working towards the content, and everything that we did in college. And I don't know if this is a Lyman Briggs thing or just a university thing as a whole, but everything had a purpose. And so every assignment, everything we did in class, every exercise, group project, it was working towards some level of understanding or some goal that was laid out for us by our professors. That necessarily didn't happen in high school. And it was like, oh, just do this busy work because. And that it helps me as a student a little bit. And so I just didn't think college was any more difficult than high school. And I can't imagine if it was.
Do you attribute any of that to the study skills that you developed during high school? Because that's one thing that, quite honestly, like I'm concerned about with my kids, because it's not something that's necessarily like taught in high school. We're trying to instill some level of study skills in middle school here with the triplets and Mackenzie. Uh, but it's rather difficult, especially in our situation, as you know. I have one that's really motivated. She's like a mini version of you, I think, and very very driven, wants to do extremely well, and then everybody else kind of falls in line behind her, where it ranges from, hey, I'm just getting my homework done so I can get it done as fast as I can so I can have extra screen time or play time or whatever, to somebody's like, I'm usually dragging somebody kicking and screaming into the kitchen table to work on something.
Yeah, right. And you guys are outnumbered. It's 4-2.
Yes.
4-2. Honestly, oh gosh, I do think it is something that I learned in high school. And honestly, going back to my middle school years, I was very lucky to be in middle school pre-COVID. Everything, let's be real, everything's different
Mhm.
because of it, the environment in classrooms and schools. And so a lot of the study skills that I did learn, though, did come from my middle school teachers and the standards that were
That's
set
interesting. It
from
went
a
back
young
you thought it
age.
went back that far.
I honestly think it goes back to like third and fourth grade when we started getting letter grades at my school. And it just, that's when I remember actually like caring about school and like things getting real. And just everything from there on out, you had to study, you had to do your homework. And there were just standards that were set that were non-negotiable. You don't do this, this happens. There's no and if and what about it. And so, and over time with taking harder classes and having different academic experiences, I feel like in high school I was able to more fine tune the study skills that I gained in those middle school years and then really know what works for me going into college.
So if you were talking to a group of parents, which you pretty much are now, because I don't think there's many teenagers that listen to the Emotional Balance Sheet podcast yet. Um, what would one or two things that you would tell parents to do during the college planning process, no matter what age their kids are currently at today?
Just honesty is the best policy. Being open and honest goes so much farther than I think anybody thinks it would. Just because once you get the hard conversations out of the way, like my parents did with me, you're able to actually talk about what's going on. Hold on one second. Oh my gosh.
I should also tell
Apologies.
you, audience, that Megan has bravely picked today to do that, to have our conversation, because she is coming off of a vacation where she has gotten very sick and is on a very heavy dosage of antibiotics. So she is a real trooper having this conversation with us today.
Never a dull moment. But no, going back to that, I just, as long as parents are honest, I feel like once you're honest and have those open conversations, expectations are set, you can just help your kid. There's not going to be any, you're not like hiding from things from them and like trying not to slip up and just, yeah, I would just say be honest. I can't imagine where I would be at if my parents weren't honest with me.
Well, Megan, I can't thank you enough. Actually, as I just mentioned, braving through the end of your sickness and having the conversation. But I know as we we're recording this towards the end of August, and this is going to be on the minds of people heading back to high school seniors heading back to school here shortly, and figuring out what their game plan would be. Um, for those high school seniors out there, what advice would you have for them going into their last year?
I would say not to write anything off completely. You never know what school you're going to end up at. I mean, half of the schools on my list were just thoughts from my parents. Like, oh, have you looked into this school? And it's like in my head. And so I look it up and suddenly I'm interested and I'm touring it. And then it becomes my dream school. And so you just never know where you're going to end up. And keeping an open mind is just so, so important.
Well, Megan, I think this conversation was very important and long overdue, and I can't thank you enough for taking some time out today, because I know that as you talked about, you are a workaholic during the summer to build your savings to pay for school and get through undergrad debt free, which I am very excited that you are completely on that pace. So thank you so much. And don't be surprised if I call you at the end of next year to check in on how sophomore year went.
Oh, of course.
Thanks, Megan.
Sounds good. Yeah, of course.
I think the absolute most important takeaway I hope we all do or all share with this conversation with Megan is that open communication between parents and students about finances and expectations is critical when going through the college planning process. Having a plan where costs are shared between parents, students, and finding that fine line sometimes of affordability. I think the other key aspect that Megan really emphasized is that developing good study habits and time management skills in high school, even when she was in middle school, is what really helped her transition from an academic standpoint. And you'll note that she said her hardest piece of the transition was from a social standpoint, not an academic standpoint. Now that you've made it to the end of another great conversation, are you looking for more? If so, head over to tamacapital.com, where you will find all of our conversations. Use the search feature to find the topic or guest you would love to learn more about. Also, don't forget to make someone else's day by sharing our show. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.